It's come to my attention that people are still struggling with Pax Transhumanity. It is an opaque game, like many Sierra Madre games and PAX games. And even though there's a fantastic video by Phasing Player on how to play the game and a playthrough of the game, just knowing what you're supposed to do, parsing the board state, knowing what you're trying to go for can be challenging. So I thought I'd make a video just to kind of go over what you should be thinking about, particularly at the start of the game, and how you win essentially. So I've set up a mock game, and I'm just gonna do it with the one player just to kind of progress it forward quicker. And give you a general idea of what you should be thinking about when you start playing Pax Transhumanity. So, this is a starting board. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to grab two random cards and decide what your hidden sphere is going to be. How do you win this game? You win this game by scoring points. How do you score points? Well, you score points by solving problems and creating companies in your hidden sphere. That is always going to be points. And that's what we're looking at right now. And then you're going to be getting points in whatever the dominant sphere ends up being, right? So if the dominant sphere ends up being globalization, then it's just points in your hidden sphere. If it ends up being space, then all your orange companies and solved problems are double, or 2 points. If it's yellow, etc., all of your solved yellow problems and yellow companies are going to be worth 2 points. So stuff in your hidden sphere is always 1. If it's in a other sphere, then you get double points for that, and that can be very important. But what we're concerning ourselves with right now is what our hidden sphere is going to be. So let's say we chose these 2 cards randomly, and we have to pick what our hidden sphere is going to be. So I would, my recommendation is to look at the board. What are the problems that can be solved? In this board in particular, it's heavy on green, right? So we have green, 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 lots of green. That means that solving problems in the developing world is going to be more possible, at least with this starting setup that we see. So we probably want to pick, out of these, I would recommend probably going with green and having that as your hidden sphere, because you're going to get more green points. You have more possibilities of getting green points. So we'll choose that. We'll choose that as our hidden sphere, and I'll just put that there to kind of signify. Normally that's hidden, but just to signify that we're green is our hidden sphere. All right. So again, how do you score points? By solving problems and creating companies. How do you solve problems and create companies? By commercializing. Commercializing is what you're ultimately trying to do. You're trying to commercialize these ideas. How do you do that? By getting patents, getting think tanks, making those ideas viable. And in order to do that, you need the thing that you need to start with is get patents or think tanks, and then hire, and then do the work. But for now, we're concentrating on getting think tanks, getting patents, and looking at the special abilities on the cards to see if any of them help us in doing that, right? So if we're looking here right now, we got the special abilities. This right here is syndicate ideas with gold discipline for 0 cost. That can be helpful if we are trying to commercialize stuff later, right? Because in order to commercialize, you need to syndicate. So if we can syndicate an idea for 0 cost, that's going to lower the amount of money that we need in order to commercialize that idea. So do we want to maybe syndicate that at some point to be able to do that? Maybe. But the other drawback is that this right here is going to be the easiest thing to research in the game, right? Because the barrier to researching is really low in the first world. And this is at the bottom, so it can be easily researched away to prevent somebody from having that ability. And that's a thing you need to concern yourself with. People researching away cards that you're using for abilities, and people that are importing things to prevent that. So for example, if I really want that ability, I might import it over here, right? And now if well, let's say that this is empty right there. I might import it over there to prevent somebody from getting rid of that, right? So defensive imports are definitely a thing. So right now we're looking at, so Blue is looking at how they can commercialize. And they see that there's a lot of orange-yellow pairs and a lot of blue-green pairs. So Blue starts off with a blue patent. So they're already halfway to being able to commercialize, halfway to the viability that they need to commercialize blue-green pairs, right? They can do that. But there's also orange-yellow pairs out there, and the orange-yellow pairs are mostly in this column. I mean, there's a couple over there, so it's going to be a lot easier to commercialize in this column than it is in this column, because the barriers to entry in this column are fewer than the barriers to this one. So it's going to be cheaper to do research and commercialize products in the first world than it would be in the developing world. So does Blue want to try going for the orange-yellow pairs or the blue-green pairs? Another thing to consider is, what does Blue eventually want to try to make this be, right? If they go with the blue-green pairs and they put stuff on the green side, like if they commercialize this card eventually at some point, and then they put it on that side, and they do that a couple times, then eventually this is going to be, because right now there's already one green in display. So if we put this in display in this way, then we change this, because there's two greens, we change this to the developing world being the dominant sphere. And when the developing world is in the dominant sphere, we get an extra 2 points for problems that we've solved. So for every green problem that we've solved, we get 2 points. And that's what we're going for, because we're trying to concentrate on green. So does Blue want to go with the blue-green commercialization right now? I think that it probably wants to stick with orange-yellow. And there's a reason for that, because we're looking at this other ability down here. May commercialize any non-tipping card without needing to syndicate it, right? So if we are able to syndicate this and get this ability, that's going to make it easier for us to commercialize. And ultimately, that's our goal. We want to try to commercialize. If we can commercialize without syndicating, then that would be good for us. Do we want to go for... I think it's going to be easier on this side. I'm gonna actually just go with it on this side, because it's cheaper to do all the things. So I'm gonna stay here. The other thing you can do is that you can import, like you can try to import things to this side. But right now, it's gonna be easy to research this and take this as a think tank. And then there's 3 other orange-yellow pairs there that I can do to try to commercialize ideas. So I'm gonna go with that. So as the blogger's first action, I think they're going to fundraise first, because you need money. And the blogger starts with less capital than anyone else, and so much as they start with none. And they need capital in order to do the things that they want to do. Earlier on in the game, you're going to be doing fundraising a lot. Later in the game, when you have more items that have been commercialized, and therefore your patents become worth more. If you have 3 greens out here, every time you have a green patent, that's 3 money for every green patent that you sell. If you have if you have 3 greens out here, actually, the developing world is gonna be the dominant sphere, and every patent is worth 6 money. So later in the game, patents are gonna be worth a lot more, and are gonna be it's going to be easier to fund your work by selling patents than it will be by doing a bunch of fundraise actions. But for now, there's only one out there, so you're concentrating on fundraising to get money. So there is no capital, so you can't move one down for every debt that you have. You just can do that. So that's what Blue does as its first action. As its second action, again, it's working towards patents or think tanks, and it wants to try to get this right here. So it wants to research this in order to be able to put this in its think tank, either in its think tank or as patents. But I think it wants it in its think tank, particularly since this idea right here, this ability right here, would it would have this ability if it did put it in its think tank. So that's a double benefit to having something in your think tank. So yeah, it's going to try to work towards that. In order to research this and put it in its think tank, it's going to need a thinker worker. So I think as its second action, the blue player is going to hire, and they're going to hire from the top, and they're going to put it over here. Because this is the thinker side, and it'll allow it to do thinker work to research, and that's going to cost 3. So it spends 1, 2, 3 in order to do that thinker work, or to hire that thinker worker. So that is its 2 actions. Other players would go at this point. Again, I'm just moving along so that you can see what one player can do and what's possible and what they're trying to look for. So it goes back to the blue player. And the blue player now wants to, it's working towards trying to research. So it's trying to get this right now, right? So it has all it needs. The barrier right now is 2 times 2 because the first world is not subsidized right now. And it didn't, if it had hired here, the cost would be 3 because any work that it does is going to be subsidized. So it's the barrier cost times 1, but it didn't go there. It went here. So right now, if it were to research this, it would cost it 4. So that's 2 times 2. And it would need to do a thinker work action. So it's going to do that. It's going to go down here to do the thinker work action. It's going to spend its 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's going to research this card, right? So it's got the card, and it's going to put it right there. And now it has both this ability, and it has a think tank in the yellow and orange disciplines. So that is a thing that it did. So that is one of its actions. It did a research action. Now it can do a second action. When you did a research action, you move this down and you put 1 more. All right. As a research action, it could have gotten patents in both yellow and orange. It decided against that. Because just the think tank was objectively the better action. So now what it's trying to work for is commercialization. It's trying to commercialize a yellow-orange pair. And there's 1, 2, 3 yellow-orange pairs out there, right? So in order to commercialize, it's going to need a maker worker, which it has. It has a maker worker right here. And it's going to need the money to do the maker work. In this case, the barrier is still 4. And it's going to need to syndicate a card that it can commercialize. So it's going to need to syndicate this one, that one, or that one, right? Now, if it's syndicated, let's say that it decides to syndicate that card. So if it decided as its second action to syndicate this card, that would be Beam Power Transport. In order to syndicate this card, it also has to deal with death rays, because death rays are apparently a thing that you have to worry about when you have Beam Power Transport. So it would have to put a cube out there like that. And cube management is a huge part of this game. Does it, particularly with this one right here, the Exocortex, in order to syndicate this, this card is really good. You may commercialize any non-tipping point card without needing to syndicate it. So good, in fact, that the ability is deactivated when it is in your think tank. Just because I think it would be a little overpowered if you had that ability and nobody can take it away from you. So one thing that another player. So one thing that the blue player could do is, instead of doing this, it could put a cube, syndicate that. That would allow it to syndicate anything else, any blue card for free. But does it really want to syndicate anything? If there was an ability on one of the blue cards, yes, but there isn't. So there's no real reason to do that. And again, cube management is important, and you're running out of cubes in this case. So it could do this. It could syndicate this to be able to commercialize any non-tipping card without needing to syndicate it, right? That's really helpful because it lowers the number of actions that you need and lowers the amount of money that you need to commercialize something. So in this game, you're thinking about both your money economy and your action economy. The amount of money that you need to do things and the amount of actions that it takes to do things. Not having to syndicate something before you commercialize it is helpful. In this case, you have a couple problems. Let's say that you do syndicate this to get this ability with the intention of then, wanting to commercialize somebody else. If somebody else sees that you have this here, they could research this just to remove that ability from you. So that's the thing you have to concern yourself with. The other thing is that in order to syndicate this, you have to put 2 cubes here to deal with the identity blur that is caused by having an exocortex. And that's two cubes that you have to use up, which again is a big deal when you don't have that many cubes. So I think we had something like that. What is blue trying to do with its second action? It wants to commercialize an orange yellow pair. I think if it tries to syndicate that, it doesn't have to spend an extra cube, and it would get an extra cube when it commercializes it. That's another thing to consider. You definitely want more cubes, right? I mentioned before, cubes are a vital resource in this game. So this is clearly better than this one. This is going to give you an orange company and a green company, which can work towards, that's points in whatever is the dominant sphere. This one gives you a green point, which you want because that's part of your hidden sphere regardless of what it ends up at. And it gets you a cube. And it doesn't require an extra cube it doesn't remove one of your cubes in the process. So this is just better for cube management. And I think that blue wants to try to go for this right here. So yeah, I think as its second action probably wants to fundraise because it needs the money. So I think it's going to go there to fundraise. But eventually I think it wants to try to work towards that, right? So we go to the next turn. Other people have done their things. Again, I'm not going to concern myself too much. In fact, I tried to do this with 2 players, and I just kept doing the same strategy for both. So might as well just do it for one. So it goes back to the blogger. The blogger still doesn't have much capital, so they probably want to fundraise one more time. Because so they're gonna put there, and fundraises again. And they are wanting to commercialize, so they're gonna syndicate this, right? So they put a card on here to syndicate it, and that's gonna cost them 2. So 1, 2. And can they commercialize that now? Well, yeah. Do they have a maker worker? They do, right there. Do they have the money to do the maker work? They do. They need 4 money, right? So 1, 2. So they have enough money to do it. Do they have a syndicated card that they can take? And in this case, yes, they can. So you just follow all the steps. In this case, you're going to do the maker work, spend the 3 to do that, and then you take this card and you decide whether you want it on the orange side or the yellow side. So right now, it looks like you're probably looking to see there's 3 companies that are out, and there's 1 yellow problem So you probably want it on the orange side because orange has more possibilities. Ideally, if you had gone with something like this, commercialize this, then you could put it on the green side and move this to the green dominant sphere, and then your points are worth more. But we decided that it was easier to try to commercialize things right away. So we went with something like this. So let's say we go with the orange side. So we go with orange. We put this in the display. And we get a patent in that discipline. So you generate patents in the visible discipline from all the syndication cubes of each player on the card. So the cube that we had is going to go in the orange. And we now have an orange patent. And we have a blue-orange patent, which can be helpful if we ever wanted to create a blue-orange or commercialize a blue-orange thing. But we don't have that right now. So we did that. After we commercialize, we take the think tank that we used and move it back to the vacated slot right here. All right, so that is a syndication, or that is a commercialization in like 3 turns, and you know, it might take more turns if people are trying to mess with you, but ultimately that is the gist of what you're trying to do. You're trying to work towards a think tank or a patents, and get a worker out there, ideally one that you can use both for thinker and maker work, and get a commercialization. So in this case, I forgot to mention the things that happen here. So right now you can choose to solve a problem. You can either choose to solve pollution or famine when you commercialize nano solid state refrigeration. So when you're deciding between these two, you probably want to pick the one that denies other people. So for example, right here, if this were solved, if this were commercialized, you would solve pollution, right? But if pollution has already been solved, then you can't get that. So it's probably better to get pollution just to prevent somebody else from trying to commercialize this and solve pollution. So in this case, we will take the pollution problem, and we also get listed here is you get an extra cube. So we get an extra cube from our supply into our capital. And now we have at least 1 point at the end of the game, because that's our hidden sphere, right? At least 1 point at the end of the game, and an extra cube we can work with. So that's essentially what you're trying to do, is commercialize things in ways that give you points. Concentrate on your hidden sphere, but also try to work towards getting whatever you have the most points in as a dominant sphere. So if you're working towards green, and you try to do more greens. In this case, you know, right now, let's say we eventually do try to go more blue-green pairs, right? Because we do need these greens out in display in order to change this to green, right? Because when we change it to green, now we have even more points that our green is going to be worth. So you're trying to commercialize things that help you, and you're trying to move the sphere to the color that helps you. Alternatively, there is the other one condition of the tycoon victory, where you're trying to get 5 companies, and in that case, colors don't matter too much. You're just trying to, in this case, 1, 2, 3 companies are out. So if you're trying to commercialize, in fact, all of these are orange-yellow pairs as well. So if you're trying to combo doing like green companies and orange companies and green problems, then whether things turn on orange, let's say you actually do concentrate more on getting orange companies, right? Because if you get orange companies, eventually space is going to be the final sphere, right? If you're constantly trying to commercialize yellow-orange pairs, and you're constantly putting the orange in display, eventually space is going to be the dominant sphere. And if space is the dominant sphere, and you create you get so in this case, if you commercialize this, you're going to get an orange company and you're going to solve a green problem. So let's say you do that one and that one and that one over the course of the game. These cards are going to change, obviously, but let's say that you're working towards that. Well, now you score points both in, you score 2 points for every orange company you have, and you score 1 point for every green problem you solve. And that kind of works together. If you also have 3 companies, that's somewhere towards your goal for 5 companies to meet the tycoon victory. So that's 3 ways that you're trying to win the game in that scenario. So it's really what you're looking for. You're looking for what is possible on the board and get to that possibility in as few actions and cubes as possible. So you're trying to get more cubes. Definitely try to get more cubes to be able to do more, have more money, and have more workers and be able to do more things. Trying to lower the number of actions required to do things. This is actually a really good card, and if you had this card, if you had a cube on this card, if you had syndicated this card, you wouldn't need to syndicate before you commercialize every time. Let's say that you were able to keep this. Let's say that you put this, all the way up here. Let's say, yeah, you imported this over here to make it really difficult for someone to research that away. And you had a worker there, right? Now, every time that you commercialize something, you don't have to syndicate it first. That is massive. That is both money that you save and actions that you save. And you can now commercialize things with fewer actions and money. So if you had that kind of engine going, that could really benefit you. And that's where the defensive importing comes in, right? Let's say that if this is here, this is way too powerful. I'm going to try to research this away, particularly because it's cheap to research this away here. But if I then import it as one of my actions over there, now it's really difficult because it's going to cost 5 to commercialize this, and it's going to cost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 14 to research it away. So it's a lot harder to get that away from another player, or remove that ability from another player. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful. I'm not going to go too much into a lot of the strategy that's involved. I just kind of want to get a primer out there so people know what they should be doing their first few turns and kind of the action process without having to watch, a whole game play out. So yeah, I hope this helps.